Anthony. And apologies, this is all new, and this is straight to point with Tracy O'Connor, and it is what it is. And, you know, I come from an advertising background, and I was thinking about this earlier on, Anthony. You know, in the advertising world and in this world of, you know, media, and everything has to be perfect. And is that real? No, this is real though, isn't it? Doesn't it feel really real?
Yeah, as you know, I work in the media as well, so I know all about it and the presentation of information and all of that. But anyway, I see a message from a lady who's saying that she can hear us now. So
thank you, thanks, probably Anne-Marie. Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. Cool. Yeah. So I'd like to just start again, and can I reintroduce to Anthony? Would you mind?
Sure. No problem.
Anthony Murphy is a writer and a photographer, an author, and a tour guide, and he's absolutely passionate about the sacred sites and mythical Ireland and the connection that we have with the land and with the sacred sites, with the myths and legends and the archetypes that go with the myths and legends. Now, this Healing Connection Network live TV is generally about healing, and I work in the field of healing, but more in the field of connection, and that's where I'm passionate, and that's what this show is all about, connection. So my guests that I'm bringing on are going to be talking about connection in whatever fields that they are passionate about, and whether that brings a connection to the land or to each other, that in itself is a form of healing. For me, it's how we live. So Anthony has written a couple of books, some fiction, some non-fiction, including Island of the Setting Sun, In Search of Ireland's Ancient Astronomers, which was published nearly 10 years ago, actually over 10 years ago. And also Newgrange, A Monument to Immortality. Now, for those of you listening outside Ireland, Newgrange is a passage tomb over 5,000 years old. That is, you can see in the background behind Anthony is an illustration of it. And I'll let Anthony talk about that in a little bit more detail. But he's also published Land of the Ever-Living Ones and Cry of the Stebach, which is Irish for hawk. His website is mythicalireland.com, and do have a browse around that later. He set that up in the year 2000, Anthony, I think. And as far as I know, on your Facebook page, you've got over 30,000 followers on that. He's an amazing photographer, absolutely incredible connection with the sites and with nature and with the sun. I don't think you're ever at home, are you? You're
right now, yeah.
Now, I managed to catch it, but you're always up at the crack of dawn or just at that moment when the sun is setting, and I would recommend anybody to go and really have a look around his website and check his photographs out. He established Mythical Ireland in the year 2000, and his photographs and films that he's made and his blogs have been published on the History Channel, is that right?
On which?
The History Channel?
I featured on the History Channel as a Newgrange expert, yeah.
Fantastic. So
that was nice.
Sorry for the long-winded, apologies for the long-winded start and the introduction. But welcome, Anthony. Thanks so much for being here. And
no problem.
Maybe you'd like to start again in explaining what is your connection with the sites and how did it start? How did you know that you had this fascination?
Well, it began when I was a child in primary school. You see, I was born and bred in Drogheda, and we're very close to the Brunabónia monuments. From my house here to Newgrange is exactly 4 miles as the crow flies. And so when we were young, the excavations were taking place, and the excavations at Newgrange were concluding, but the excavations at Mouth were really only getting exciting. And there was a lot of discoveries being made, and it was kind of, you were consciously aware of what was going on all the time because it was in the news every second week. You know, there was new revelations about the past. It was really, really fascinating stuff. I suppose I didn't realise the true extent and the true importance of the place until I was much older, after I met the artist Richard Moore in 1999. And Richard approached me because he wanted to learn a little bit about astronomy, because he was convinced that the astronomy of the monuments was sort of being not overlooked, but maybe underplayed, and that there was a lot more going on in terms of sun and moon and stars. And at the same time, he kind of instilled in me, I suppose, an interest in mythology. So I suddenly realised there was a huge amount of myths and legends about, that are specifically tied in with this area. And so we kind of fed off each other, and all of a sudden we were planning to write this book, which we eventually published. I think that was 7 years after I met him. So it was 7 years in the making, and it turned out to be quite epic, because it's quite a big work, and it's quite expansive. It covers a huge amount of ground. Now, I have found since that I wrote another book called Newgrange Monument to Immortality, which was as a result of my own sort of effort or journey to make a deeper connection, because there's all these labels that you hear about the sites, passage tombs and Neolithic and megalithic art, and all of the stuff that the archaeologists use, the terminology they use to describe Newgrange and its sister sites. But the myth gives you sort of a different pathway into exploring them, and I found that the combination of myth and astronomy gave just a very, well, not a very different, I suppose at the end of the day, the archaeology is extremely important in terms of the dating and in terms of giving us some idea of what the people were like, and things that they used, the tools that they used, the things that they might have eaten, etc., etc. But beyond the label of a passage tomb, there's this thing in Irish called a she, a she, which is almost an indescribable or inexplicable term. It's like the passage tomb is a thing. It's a monument. It's a dead, structure that was once used for X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z being pertaining to the burial of, bones. The she, on the other hand, is something that is very much alive and that comes alive, and that draws you into it in a sort of a very mysterious, ethereal sort of manner, and says to you basically, and I explained this in Newgrange in my book, which was published 5 years ago now, that Newgrange has a habit of speaking back to you softly if you care to listen, and if you're there at the right times, and you just detach yourself a little bit from the tourist race that happens there. And if you spend a few evenings there in the twilight, you get a very different sense of the place. So the connection for me initially was through astronomy and mythology and archaeology. But then I found that it became profound and sacred, and that really and truly the she are, I suppose, designed as places of rebirth as much as they are to do with which is the emphasis that is placed largely upon them by the experts. They're not just about death. It's not about death in the end. It's actually about the end being a beginning and part of a cycle. So I hope I've explained that. I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
Oh, beautiful. And you're bringing us to a really lovely place. The she, as I understand it, being Irish, perhaps is there an English word that you could describe to help other listeners outside of that?
Not one word. No, it's very difficult in one word. So she would traditionally be translated as a fairy mound, but that is very inadequate in describing the she. Really what the she appear to represent, according to the myths, and of course the myths we don't know how far back in time they go, what I get a sense of exploring the mythology is that the myth contains essences of what the sites were undoubtedly about to previous cultures. Perhaps the culture that built it. Is it possible that an oral tradition can survive 5,000 years? Absolutely it is. Of course it is. If an oral tradition can survive 2 generations, then it can survive 200. That's the way I look at it. I would say the she are portals. And that sounds a bit new agey and a bit vague. So let me just draw people in a little bit further. in the myth, it is said specifically about Angus Og, who became the owner of Brunabónia, or the she of Macon Og, the she of the young son, as it became known, that he was able to come out from Newgrange and sometimes be seen in this world, and very much in the battles between the two-headed Danann, who are I suppose the godlike, and maybe they were ancestor gods or whatever. The gods who were said to have built them and allocated them to each other. They had battles with the Fir Bolg and the Fomorians and the Milesians. And the most interesting for me is the Milesians, because the Milesians were the ones who appeared to have defeated them. But in essence, what happened was that the Danann said, no, we're going to take the sea and you can have Ireland on the surface, as it were. We're going to have Ireland under the surface. But really what they were doing was they were giving themselves the ability to access both worlds. And that's very much what the word she is about. It's about access to other worlds. Now, what does that mean in layman's terms? Does it mean that there are actually gods toing and froing between some heavenly realm? Well, that's certainly something that could be postulated. You know, Tiernan Og, Tiernan Yo, the land of the ever-living ones. Mag Mel, the plane of happiness. But also, you can think about realms of consciousness, you know, in terms of depriving yourself of the senses and light and everything else and sound, and retreating into one of these spaces, and perhaps in such a way making some sort of a shamanic or otherworldly journey. And then, principally, my own work is focused on the idea of the near-death experience, which Newgrange and some of the passage mounds appear to replicate. You know, the idea of a dark tunnel leading towards a brilliant light, which is very much a major part of many of the near-death experiences that people recount. So it just makes me wonder whether in prehistory that some people hadn't had some sort of a near-death experience and come back to their tribe and said, you're never going to believe what happened to me. I died and I went across onto the other side, and there was this, you know, journey down the tunnel and this wonderful light and this experience that they have, this enormous life-changing experience with a being of love and light on the other side. So I tapped into that in my work as a possibility, and again, it's speculation on my part, but it certainly ties in with the myths, I would think. The idea of, you know, access to other worlds, not just other spaces of consciousness, but perhaps literally that journey that we make at the end of this life and the beginning of the next one. Do you feel they have a message for us in today's world? Undoubtedly. Absolutely, undoubtedly. Tied in with the myths, there is the resurgence. First of all, there's a resurgence in modern time of interest in the Sidhe and in the associated mythology. There's also, in folklore, the belief that the two-headed Danann are actually going to come out of the Sidhe again. And that is quite prevalent in various places connected with different monuments and in different landscapes around the country. Is the idea that when they disappeared into the mounds, the Dananns weren't actually dying or retreating permanently. It was always with the preemptive aspect of the agreement they made with the Milesians was that they would re-emerge at some stage. Now, I often wondered whether that was something to do with, the imperial aspect of our recent history, where, you know, the mythology of the invasion myths, the Leber Gabála, seem to have replayed itself, not just in myth, but also in actual history. So you have this 7 sets of influxes or invasions that happen in mythology in the Leber Gabála. And then when you look at the archaeological and anthropological record, there's an entire sort of history of waves of invasions that happened. So you could include the Neolithic influx that happened when agriculture arrived before Newgrange was built in that era. You could look at, the arrival onto these shores of the Vikings, the Normans, the British, and all that. So I wonder whether, the re-emergence hadn't got something to do with that, the fact that, people felt that there needed to be that re-emergence to happen. But then, curiously, you get stuff like, the collapse of the economy that happened starting around 10 years ago. And our government literally repeated the Leber Gabála narrative when they Danann handed the keys of the country to the Troika from Europe. So another influx from the mainland, replicating what happened when the Milesians came in. Now, there were battles between the Dananns and the Milesians, but it wasn't cataclysmic. Both sides suffered losses and all the rest, but they eventually made this, this agreement. I'm starting to hear a little bit of sound. I feel the two of the Danann are already here with us with lighter hearts. Do you agree? Yeah, and I think in essence this is what this is about for me. Having spent so much time looking at the mythology, I'd be sort of a little bit more Jungian and Campbellesque in my outlook on the mythology, and a little bit less in terms of we shouldn't look at this as a new religion. I think part of the resurgence of interest in the Dananns is directly resulting from the fact that the church, the traditional church, the Christian, the Catholic church, that has served Ireland for the last, millennium and a half, certainly, is giving way to something else. It has lost its power, and there's a change, and there's a big change happening. I think the Tuatha De Danann, to me, a lot of this is about archetypes, and it's about serving those archetypes, and it's about using them to try and create a better existence, not just for ourselves, but for others as well. And that might sound like a little bit of New Age fluff, except for the fact that, I think it was very selfless of the De Dananns to make this tryst to make this accord with the Legion, in which they said, we're going to give way to you guys. We're going to let you do your thing. We're going to be here at the same time. And there are, of course, tales recounted in the myths about how people visited Newgrange in particular. Newgrange has this symbolic power that makes it greater than Mouth and Doubt, even though the three are undoubtedly meant to be seen as part of one great whole. Sheed Broga, which is Newgrange's original name, Sheon Vru, or Sheed Mackinac, as I said earlier, has this magnetic power. So, for instance, there's a guy called Gilla Lugon who went to communicate with Angus Og there, according to, I think, the 12th century myth. I'm not forgetting that Dermot's body was brought there in order that an aerial life could be put into him so that he could be spoken to every day. And that in itself is mysterious, because, well, why would you bring somebody into Newgrange to inject an aerial life into them? What is an aerial life? The idea is that you're bringing somebody back to life. And if you think about, I love the idea of the remains of the deceased in the Neolithic were treated with a great reverence in a way that we don't deal with the dead today. And I think that's a huge, big part of the reason there needs to be this resurgence, is because we have built up a fear around death. And maybe, just maybe, some of our beliefs in our more recent history have served that or fueled that, but that hasn't actually served us very well. We have a fear around death. I think our ancient ancestors didn't have quite that same fear. They seem to have dealt directly with the bones of their deceased. Today, what happens when somebody dies? We hand over the care of their remains to an undertaker. And, we only see them when they're nicely polished up and brushed up and made up and suited up and all the rest. So we sort of take a little bit of the natural aspect of it. In ancient times, what it looks like is that they took their dead and allowed the animals and the birds to feed on them, to strip the corpse. and they handled the bones. In some cases, they built a funeral pyre, the bones were burnt, they removed the remains and washed them carefully before they were then placed in the sheath in the chambers of the monuments, which to me tells a very interesting story about, you know, how, as I said, they had this immediate connection with the ancestor through physical remains. Like at Fornox, for instance, it appears that there's one mound that was used for burning the corpses, and the other mound was used for burying the remains. So you can tie in the myth with the archaeological evidence. One appears to sort of agree with the other, as it were.
Yeah. And can you hear me now? Okay.
I can hear you now. Miracles happen.
Well, we will overcome it. Thank you. That I absolutely agree with you. And there's something maybe about the whole fear of death connected to our loss of connection with the other world in our everyday lives. And if we were to understand that a bit better, that maybe there wouldn't be so much fear around death and what happens to our bodies afterwards. So you've opened up a really interesting question, and I would love to have more time to maybe explore that with you a little bit more. But thank you so much. We're just running out of time now, unfortunately, but thank you so much for really shedding a beautiful light on the possibilities that surround these ancient passage tombs and what they mean for us in our everyday world. I'm definitely going to ask you to come back again, Anthony, at some point, and we can explore this in a little bit more detail. And apologies to everybody for the broadcast quality, but at least the images are stable, so we're getting there. And thank you to the She for helping us along. And if anybody wants to find out more about Anthony and his work, again, mythicalireland.com is Anthony's website, and you can find me at tracyo'connor.com, and we'll put the link up on the Facebook page later on. But I'm wishing you all a wonderful evening, and thanks so much for being with us again. And Anthony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great to talk to you. Even in chat, it's hilarious. We find ways around these things. But thanks, and thanks everybody. Have a great evening, and tune in again next week, where hopefully there'll be less technical glitches, and we'll be talking about networking and the power of networking to support ourselves in collaboration. Have a good evening. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.